reply. Thank you to those online and those sat with us here. Thank you so much, Chris. I'm sorry for the rushing. We have a full house. I'll let you settle in. For those who haven't seen my face before, my name is Jess. I'm Global Community Manager at the RSA, which means I have the pleasure of working with fellows across the world, including Dr. Alexandra Kravich. And we have prepared a series of events for 2026, and this is the event that's kickstarting that series. The events will vary by nature, but all be addressing topics that are particularly relevant to the challenges we're facing today. This is an obvious example of that. So our topic today is the overlap of physical and digital vulnerabilities in an era of hybrid warfare. We're going to be examining how modern tactics erase the boundaries between the physical world and the digital sphere. As I said, as you were walking in, all of our panelists are fellows of the RSA. They represent a wide range of expertise across this area. And we will be doing a Q&A at the end. So we'll let our panelists answer the questions first, and then we'll hold your questions until the very end. And that applies to those online as well. I'll make sure I check that we've not missed any from you. So I'm going to do some quick introductions of our lovely panelists. So I've mentioned Alex. Alex leads data acquisition and AI projects at Optopol. And beyond that, she is our RSA community lead for Poland and has been for over a decade. And she serves on our RSA Responsible AI Steering Committee. To my left, we have Tatiana. Tatiana Daniluk is a Ukrainian legal policy expert in London. She's currently serving as the chair on the Committee on International Economic Relations and Cooperation within Ukraine's Ministry of Economy Youth Council. Goodness, can't get my words out. Chris, next to Alex, is an associate professor for cyber threats at Swansea University. He's the author of multiple books on cybersecurity, hybrid warfare, and international security threats. We also have Sean Hanley with us. He's an associate professor of comparative Central and Eastern European politics at UCL. He specializes in democratic backsliding, populism, and anti-establishment parties. And Roger Casal is a former Labour MP and PPS in the Foreign Office. Since leaving Parliament, he has set up an award-winning NGO, New Europeans, and he's currently leading on a new project called the Westminster Alliance for Ukraine to mobilise parliamentary and public support for the Coalition of the Willing. So, to kick-start our conversation, sorry, Chris, I'm going to put you straight on the spot. Would you mind giving us some context for what is happening across Europe right now and the current state of our global security?
You've all seen the news, is incredibly challenging. It's an often overused word, but I think it's true. And I think there's several competing dynamics. One is you've got changes in the international order, you've got rising powers and rising challenges, or at least a resurgent Russia and a rising China. And you've got the old US-led Euro-Atlantic Alliance European order. That's all been under sustained systemic challenge. I mean, some of it dates to the post-Cold War period, but a lot dates to, I pin it to not the rise of Vladimir Putin so much, but a particular date, and that would be around about 2012, when he became president again in a castling move with Dmitry Medvedev. Ever since that time, and for a variety of reasons I don't have time to go into, I tend to think, and this is the subject, I'm not here to plug my books, I'm not, but it is the subject of my very latest book on Russia, which was published 29th of December. It's just really hot off the press. And that deals with systematic challenges, multimodal, multi-level, which is why I use the descriptor hybrid warfare. It's below the threshold of kinetic violence, and that is defined under international law, the UN Charter, as making the step change into war. Beneath that threshold, Russia particularly is engaged in so many activities I can hardly begin to describe and characterize them for you. But they're on the cyber front, and that includes the use of cyber criminal networks to target economic infrastructure. To what extent that is a straightforward modus vivendi with the state or with power brokers. And there's, state protection involved in return for kickbacks, and to what extent that is manifested then in part of government policy is a good question to begin with. The next would be cyber kinetic or cyber physical attacks. Ukraine has been the epicenter ever since 2015, 16, and even before into 2014, when the biggest event happened, it's the annexation of Crimea. And as an adjunct to that, I did tell Jess the story where I was invited to a NATO splinter meeting. So it was held at Celtic Manor. So I was invited down. I remember asking the splinter meeting, does NATO have a red line in respect to Crimea? Because I saw that as a step change. That moved from the destabilization attempts in the Donbass and in Crimea into a form of annexation. And they did it very subtly on the back end of the Sochi Winter Olympics. It was in some respects a sophisticated operation. They did it in the interregnum between presidencies. One had fled, and then the revolution of dignity was happening. So it's the prime time, and it's a territory grab or land grab. We've not seen that since the 19th century, at least from great powers or traditional great powers. But that's been combined with influence operations or information ops, psyops in the Western sense, and that's spread right across 4 continents, and it's well evidenced. You're looking at least 45 different cases within nations of influence operations, and it's been mining at the cracks of society. It's been challenging discontent about ideas of nationalism, identity politics, and migration being one of the key issues. It's tapping into fears of things like a European army. One of the Kremlin's goals is to see, as much as possible, the European Union and NATO fracturing. So you look at, I don't want to look too contemporaneously, but it's been a very difficult moment of the last months, year, more. That has meant that Europe needs to revisit some of its core priorities, including defense expenditure right across the board, both conventional, cyber, electronic warfare, and a whole range of other things. Where Russia's not particularly strong, although you've talked only Ukrainian, I've talked a lot, it's a different experience when you're on the ground. But in a conventional sense, it's overmatched by just European NATO members on its own, even I think under current stocks and current levels. Where it has got overmatch is in nuclear, and it's waved that nuclear saber a lot and vocally. And that maybe has been one of the levers to frighten European leaders. I wouldn't say across the board, but I was among them. I'm not that I'm a European leader by any stretch, but I was one who took notice at the nuclear threats. I come from a nuclear weapons background. It's the sort of thing I take seriously. Others I talk to, less so. It's there as a stick. Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. No, I could go on forever. I've spent years writing books.
We have one mic between us today. Thank you so much for that context building of what's been going on. Alex, my next question is for you. And given your involvement in AI projects and your background in decision making and leadership, what's your perspective on the use of AI in armed conflicts? What are the potential risks associated with relying on AI for military decisions?
I think that I will start with adversarial manipulation. So that's one of the things that worries me personally. But obviously, what Chris said just a couple of minutes ago about the crisis of leadership is behind decision making. So we are facing unprecedented events in recent years, in the recent 5 years. And we mentioned the eastern part of the globe, Russia, but we have to remember that the hegemon of the world, the global hegemon is the United States. So we shouldn't be forgetting about the role that the United States is playing. And on the eastern side is China. So all of those three powers play an important role in current state of safety and security. So AI, coming back to Jess' question, is inevitable in all. At the moment, we have almost everywhere AI, from our toasters to drones that are being used in Ukraine. In Poland, we have about 3,000 cyber attacks weekly. So Poland has been attacked within the last year, in 2025, for over 170,000 times. Just imagine. So that's a serious number. So cybersecurity is of utter importance at the moment, and AI is being used on both sides. So we need AI to be more secure, but on the other hand, we know that isn't a double-edged sword. We are also using AI for attacks, for adversarial attacks and manipulation and misinformation and disinformation. So that is the main problem.
Thank you. And Roger, I'm going to come to you next. In light of what's been shared already, should we be worried about the state of the transatlantic relationship? And if so, what are the major reasons for that?
Yes, we should be concerned about it. But I think at the same time, we should recognize that although it is changing, it is also enduring. And two very important questions have been asked of the transatlantic relationship this week. One by President Zelensky in Davos, who said, if Europe is attacked, will America still come to our aid? That's really more about NATO. But of course, the transatlantic relationship is the bedrock of all the post-war institutional order, which we are seeing, as Chris has pointed out, collapsing before our eyes. But I think the transatlantic relationship endures. And the other question was asked by President Trump to Donald Trump to Mark Rutte, which is, if America was attacked, would NATO come to their aid? And the answer to that was yes. A very, very strong security economic interests that underpin the Atlantic Alliance, and that's why it will endure. But it's not just an alliance of interests, it's also an alliance of values. You think about the founding values of the American Constitution, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and you think of the values of the French Revolution, égalité, liberté, fraternité. I sometimes think solidarity is a dirty word to Americans. They like competition. But I would add to the other values in terms of that underpin the European Union, certainly solidarity, equality, and freedom, but also democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. So what is the respect for the rule of law of the American leadership today? I think there's one value in there that I would really want to highlight. I think we have the value of freedom. We want to defend the core value of the free world. I think America still sees itself as the bastion of the free world, and I think that's ultimately what the transatlantic relationship is about and why it endures. But I think so there are those three. There's also the sentimental value level, by the way, which we're seeing today. Chris referred to the news, how hurtful it is when Donald Trump stands up and says that, NATO backed away from the front line in Afghanistan. You only need to close your eyes and try to imagine Donald Trump in diapers, and it's not that difficult to have that. Don't hold it image in your mind for too long. But that's at a transactional analysis level. That's a comment of a child. But so essentially, Mark, some people know how to play him quite well. That's why he loves Queen so much, or loved the Queen so much, and loves coming over for royal visit. Queen's not there anymore, but the new royal family. It's why Mark Rutte was right to say, daddy, and play him that way at a sentimental level. If you think about, it's why people are so upset today. But it's also why we're so proud of, what happened on the Normandy beaches and so on. But fewer and fewer people alive today who actually have a direct memory, first-hand memory of the Second World War. And I think that sentimental link is important. But what really binds a transatlantic relationship is and a lot of the media plays at that level, but we need to look underneath that, the interests and the values. The thing we need to do most about and be most concerned about, and I'll stop here, is democracy, democratic backsliding in the United States. You know, the United States has got to be not just the bastion of global freedom, but it's also got to be a democracy. And I think that we are seeing that's what concerns me most. I don't think that would destroy the it would challenge a huge challenge to the transatlantic relationship, but I think that's where we need to put the effort in building links with those who are trying to reverse the democratic backsliding in the United States and here in Europe. But we can talk more about that later.
Thank you. And Tatiana, being directly impacted by the consequences of this war, could you explain why should the treatment and the integration of Ukrainians across Europe be understood not just as a humanitarian issue, but as a strategic investment in Europe's future security?
The integration of Ukrainians across Europe should be understood not only as a strategic investment in Europe's long-term security and stability, because many Ukrainians who arrived is highly educated, economically active, and experienced in operating under crisis conditions. They integrate quickly into labor markets, contribute through work and taxes, and help address workforce shortages in several European countries. And for general information, 55% of middle-aged Ukrainians have a high education. And in cities, this figure reaches up to 60-70%. Beyond the economic dimension, Ukrainians bring direct experience of Russian aggression, hybrid warfare, and disinformation. This knowledge strengthens Europe's collective resilience. In this sense, integration is not charity, it's a contribution to Europe's security architecture.
Thank you, Tatiana. And Sean, in light of everything that's been shared, particularly Alex's points around AI, how sustainable is European solidarity when the security pressures are becoming permanent rather than exceptional?
Yeah, thanks. I'm not sure if I could tie this into AI, but I mean, what I would say is that the kind of security-oriented politics are very much also about democracy, about legitimacy, about consent, and the question of really, are we looking at kind of crisis politics, a kind of short-term situation that we have to manage like COVID, or are we really looking at something, as your question suggests, which is much more permanent and long-term, a bit like the climate crisis, which is really going to be a kind of something that needs political and social management for generations going into the future. The question of solidarity is interesting. I'm not sure if you kind of mean solidarity between member states, between European states, which have quite diverging interests. We can think in terms of also solidarity between governments and citizens, the rulers and the ruled, which is very much a question of trust. And the kind of populism which drives contemporary politics is all about distrust in politicians and in elites. And we can think of solidarity in a sort of as between citizens in the sense of seeing our fellow citizens as like us, and being willing to make and our fellow Europeans as well, and being willing to make sacrifices for them for some kind of shared purpose and shared identity. I guess the sort of second point that I'll make is that when security pressures become permanent, well, in a sense, we've been here before, because that was the Cold War. Cold War levels of defense spending was sometimes way in excess of what Donald Trump is asking for. And I think we can, I mean, the phrase the new Cold War has been sort of exaggerated and used and kind of tossed around. But I think we can make some useful contrasts between the whatever era we are in now and the kind of Cold War period, thinking of European democracies. And I think those contrasts do emphasize how difficult things could be. So if we look at the kind of the Cold War era, It's an era of expanding economies, expanding welfare states, kind of social citizenship that underpins West European democracies. There's a clear hegemon, kind of leader in the form of the US. There are stable political parties of centre left and centre right. And there's kind of the US can quickly provide security, and as it did throughout the Cold War. And today, what we have is politics which are much more volatile, much more populist, societies which are much more fluid and much more complex. We have the US potentially absenting itself, or, I mean, even if one thinks that, that in a sense Trump will be out of power, things will never, I mean, Mark Carney said this, there's no going back to the past. And so there'll be a different, very different situation then. So I think we can say that, I mean, I can't say how sustainable it is, but I think the political challenges are going to be very great, and they will require some kind of different and maybe more imaginative politics rather than just defending the status quo and nostalgia. I think, what did Carney say? Nostalgia is not a program. So I think that's what I would say.
Thank you. I'm going to stay over here, Roger, 'cause, I want to ask you more about the Coalition of the Willing. And could you explain a bit more about that and what its objectives are?
Yes, well, I hope most people know the answer to that question, but just to refresh us, it's 31 countries that want to support Ukraine now and in the future through providing more military equipment now and helping Ukraine to build up its military capacity. But I think the key point is really that once peace comes, people talking about peace, really what we're going to see, I hope, is a ceasefire at some point, and then the conflict will not be over. It just, the violent part of the conflict needs to be stopped so that a peace process can begin. Often people confuse those two things. But of course, rightly, Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron have said Putin's absolutely not to be trusted, and therefore you need to be there with people in Ukraine once that day comes to really safeguard and secure that. Now, this is a very noble ambition. The trouble is, are they able to, what's the reality? Are they able to deliver on that vision? And I don't think they are, which is why we started Westminster Alliance for Ukraine. I think you need much more parliamentary and especially public support, because it's going to need much more defence spending. And there's a group within the Coalition of Willing, the E5, Poland, Germany, France, Italy, and the UK, that have the largest expenditure. They're working very closely together on that. But then it's not just a question of having the military kit and the investment, and that's not going to be easy to get through through the public. They've also got to be joined up, and they've got to be deployable, because this isn't just about having a stockpile of weapons. They've got to actually be able to use them. They've got to be the capabilities. And I think there's also an economic dimension to this. I think very, very important to keep up the pressure to get the, not just to freeze the Russian assets in Belgium, but to seize them and use them, although, but crucially to get the military equipment that they need. The Tomahawk missile, the United States not going to give them. Can Germany give the Taurus missile? And never forget, and we've got to stop here, that there's, we've got to start this with Ukraine itself. And the reconstruction of Ukraine has got to be the reconstruction of the Ukrainian people. Who would have thought 4 years ago, nearly 4 years ago, that they could resist in the way? We have so much to learn from Ukraine. And I think we need to recognize that there's going to be a big job of work to learn a lot from Ukraine and to work with people of Ukraine because Putin doesn't want just to take over the territory. He wants to raise the idea and the love of freedom and democracy from the hearts of Ukrainian people. And we need to build that up, make more, they are the front runners in terms of democratic resilience in Europe. And we've got a lot to learn from them. And I think the Coalition of the Willing's got to be about that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Chris, I'm going to come to you next. And in your view, did the EU and NATO member states respond sufficiently to Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Should we be concerned about the potential alliance between Russia and China against the EU or US?
Thank you. I'll tackle the last question first because I think it's easiest. None of this is easy, and it's not easy to predict the future. But I mean, China's only been a unified state since 1949. For one, it's got no history of engagement in foreign conflicts. The BRI is interesting. The Belt and Road Initiative is interesting. The String of Pearls are interesting. To what extent they're straightforward power contestations and on a military sense, that's a conversation. China's economy is upwards of 10 times the size of Russia's. In terms of the demographics, massive difference. Even though China's got a falling population. They've got border disputes as well, including in the region of Mongolia. They got some mutual concerns, some mutual interest. They've engaged in multilateral exercises, including some big naval exercises. There's some arms, to a degree, arms transfer. I don't see any intelligence cooperation whatsoever. I think, on that note, I think they're as much competitors as cooperators. I think that's the most we can judge. On the European question, I agree very much with Roger. I wind the clock back to 2014, and that was a step out from the destabilization attempts that were taking place clearly in the Donbass. Passportization was one of them, offering Russian passports to Ukrainian citizens, playing this idea of ethno-nationalism, which is channeled from people like Alexander Dugin, and the idea where Russian speakers, people of an association with Russia, should be protected by Russia. Well, that gives a lot of leeway into a lot of states. A lot of other states can make that claim. 2014 was that step change. It was into territorial acquisition, annexation. What happened 8 years later? My best guess is Russia saw an opportunity. We had change in European leadership. Maybe the perceived weakness of European leaders collectively. Worthwhile challenging NATO responses, given that Russia has pushed. They've pushed a bit more. They've pushed in certain areas. Not enough pushback for any form of deterrence to happen, in my view. So I think they pushed to a point where they were fed, the Kremlin was fed a lot of intelligence. The Ukraine was weak. They'd be welcomed. People put flowers in the turrets of the APCs and the tanks, and they were cheered as liberators. And this neo-Nazi trope, the familiar refrain as well of the memory of World War II. It's powerful. But Europe, I don't think it's hard to think of Europe as a whole collective, because there are individual differences between NATO member states, European Union member states. We hold somewhat different views. Coalescing those views around sanctions are one thing, but secondary sanctions would be even more powerful. But I'd agree with once you've frozen the assets, and you look at where those assets have come from, and if you look at Russia's oligarch clan as well, none of it's been reinvested in Russia per se, outside of the big cities, St. Petersburg, Moscow, Sochi. Otherwise, the infrastructure is pretty much it. The average salary in Russia is something like around about $15,000 US. So the standard of it is a lot more on a number of different fronts the European Union and NATO could have done. The one thing I will just finally add is we've had a so-called peace dividend post-Cold War. If we raise defense expenditure proportionally to where it probably needs to be, if you see Russia as a genuine threat, if you see China as a tidal challenge, if you take Arctic security seriously, it requires material reinvestment, probably to near Cold War levels, say 5% of GDP. Well, that comes at the expense, a choice between the health service, prisons, road and rail. It is a budgetary choice. It may not appeal to electorate, electorates. But if it's placed in the right context, it should appeal, because Ukraine matters hugely to the future of Europe and the future of who we want to be. They've made a clear decision to move, as a people, move westward, not eastward. You know, in mind and in spirit. I used to live in Estonia. You go and feel the sense of belonging to the European project. And I think I see the same. Everyone I've spoken to who's Ukrainian with them. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Sean, could a security-first approach undermine the democratic resilience it aims to protect?
Yeah, I guess it depends what you mean by a security first approach. I mean, we are talking about potentially much higher defense spending. Some countries will be maybe reintroducing some form of conscription, military service. There's a whole issue of infrastructure, cybersecurity, and I guess even we could think, you know, surveillance, emergency powers, that kind of thing. And the obvious choices between, you know, social, environmental spending and defense spending, which opens an opportunity for illiberal populists just to essentially make what political scientists call a welfare chauvinist pitch and say, well, why are you spending money, our taxes on foreigners, on faraway countries, when you know, there are waiting times in hospitals and potholes in the roads. And in a sense, we talk about the European project. Well, we need a new European project. What does that actually mean? How can that be explained? I suppose we could wonder about the rise of, you know, military lobbies, defense lobbies, and that kind of thing. However, I don't think those kind of scenarios would necessarily be realized, because I think the likelihood is that Europe will move very slowly, very haltingly, and it will maybe militarize too little. And there's no, you know, strong executive center in Europe. There's no obvious kind of leader. And there's also contestation around what security means. Where do the threats come from? Is Russia a threat? Well, you know, we would probably agree that it is, but there are politicians, certainly in Eastern Europe and maybe in Western Europe, who will tell you that no, maybe it isn't. Maybe Putin has got quite limited demands, and we can just, you know, sadly, we have to, you know, put our own people first. There are limited amounts of money. There are tough choices to make, and so on. And climate change, that's a threat. AI, private actors, big tech, maybe that's a threat. I guess I think the most likely scenario that I can imagine is something which is a sort of middle kind of scenario, in the sense that the kind of Europe that's emerging is increasingly not a Europe of democracies, but a kind of potentially a patchwork of democracies, autocracies. Many people say Hungary is the first authoritarian state now within the European Union, and countries like Poland or Slovakia, whose democratic institutions are quite damaged. And Poland has a centrist liberal government now, but it has a huge number of dilemmas about how to depoliticize the institutions that have been captured, that were kind of captured and sort of taken over by the previous kind of populist government. And I think the kind of scenario we might see is that, for the sake of defense and security, which requires consensus under the current European Union rules between governments, we will be maybe buying off populist governments in Hungary or in Slovakia, and in exchange for their willingness to go along with you know, higher levels of European security and defense coordination, we may kind of back off somewhat on rule of law and on other concerns, because there tends to be an equation that all populists are kind of pro-Russian and all mainstream parties are pro-Ukrainian, and that's not really quite true. Populists are very, very pragmatic. Many of them are political shift shapers who will maybe quite easily accommodate themselves to a greater degree of defense coordination if it means they can do their own thing within their own countries. So I can imagine that there could be a kind of some awkward compromises within Europe, accommodating certain kinds of populists, accommodating themselves to a more of a security-first approach, provided that nobody looks too closely at their kind of governance. And somebody like Giorgia Meloni in Italy might be an example of this. Populists know very well that someone like Nigel Farage or other illiberal populists in Europe know very well that Vladimir Putin is not popular. Donald Trump is not popular, and they need to adjust their pitch. So I would see democracy being damaged in that way rather than in some more kind of spectacular way. Okay.
Thank you. Tatiana, how has Ukrainian civil society contributed to resilience and security during the war? And what lessons can European democracies draw from that model?
Ukrainian civil society has played a decisive role in maintaining resilience and security during the war. Volunteers, community networks, and digital initiatives acted quickly and effectively, often filling critical gaps in the early stage of the invasion. The key lesson for European democrats is the trust, decentralized action, and strong civil engagement significantly increase our society's ability to withstand shocks. And what is more important is Ukraine demonstrates that civil society is not only a democratic value, but a practical security asset.
Thank you. And Alex, I'm going to come to you next. How does disinformation degrade the quality and speed of executive decision-making during critical crises, such as wartime? And where is the line between securing the truth and censorship?
It's a very good question. So we all know that misinformation and disinformation is like a plague at the moment. We haven't had times like that ever before. So that's one of the axioms. Yes, we can't discuss that. We had different tools of propaganda during like communism era, but we cannot compare it to today because of the tools that we are developing, one of them being AI. And now we are working on agentic AI. And once we have agentic AI, so it will be different than, the popular LLMs models, which are just large language models, but they are not agentic. They are not able to make decisions on your behalf. They are just language models. But once we have a proper strong agentic AI, we'll be in huge trouble because misinformation will play even greater role. We know that if you are overloaded with information, any sort of information, especially contrasting information, so from one source you hear that the Ukrainians are winning war, from the other you hear that they're actually losing war, you're confused. So one of the strategies is to confuse you. If you're confused, you will be in decision paralysis. So that applies also to decision makers, to leaders. And we were talking today about crisis of leadership. Before Donald Trump introduced this new culture of diplomacy, we had witnessed something that we could call, from just borrowing a term from management, transformational leadership. Like Joe Biden was more into transformation. He wanted to meet long-term goals. Whereas nowadays, what we are facing is transactional leadership. And Roger just mentioned that there are some sentiments we can we can detect some sort of tendency towards sentiment from the side of the states, yes, that they can be like flattered, and we can play on those sentiments that Donald Trump may hold. And actually, I'm not quite sure about that. I know that he is quite sensitive to being flattered, and Mark Rutter is one of the examples who is playing him pretty well. But on the other hand, I have to mention our current American ambassador to Poland, who said that there is no sentiment in dealings with the US, there is just business. So if we buy their arms and we invest in their industry, they may consider helping us. So this is not like transformational leadership, collaboration, solidarity, union of ideas. This is purely business-based transaction. So this is where we are at the moment. And now we have to come back to AI and this question of AI. Again, what we are facing is basically a race. Who will have a better AI? Who will dominate large groups, populations of people? So if you are like huge tech giant, like let's say Microsoft or Google or Amazon, you're building those huge power centers, AI centers, and investing over $5 billion in those infrastructures. So if you take all of those factors together, you see that we will have a crisis. We will have to have some mechanism to control those powers that are evolving in front of our eyes. So we will have to invest in some anti-monopoly mechanism that will control those powers, such as big tech giants, and by not allowing them to get control over large populations through huge data centers, huge AI platforms, and so on and so forth. So AI is a weapon of the future. We are weaponizing information, and we are weaponizing mathematics. And the last but not least, I just feel like obliged to mention, I need to mention the last paper by Jan LeCun that was published at the end of 2025. Jan LeCun is one of the leading figures within the AI community, scientific community, he published this paper, which seems to be really revolutionary. What he's proposing this LA-JEPA program, which is late Euclidean learning. It's a different process of teaching algorithms. So far we've been training data purely on heuristical methods. So when AI was making mistakes, so we will be just making it over and over again. Now he's coming up with this more holistic approach of SSLs and SSS. So those are like self-supervising systems and self-supervising learning. Totally different approach, revolutionary and amazing. If we introduce this approach and we evolve those existing algorithms into something far more powerful, we will be in more trouble than we are at the moment. So I will put a dot here, so full stop.
Thank you. Lots to consider. We are nearing the end of our hour, so I have one last question for all panelists to answer. It might be quite hard to wrap up in one sentence, but I challenge you to do so. In one sentence, what is your considered view on the long-term ways that Russia's war against Ukraine is challenging Europe to respond? Tatiana, are you happy to start? We'll pass the mic.
Yeah, let's try. Europe is being forced to rethink its security policy as authoritarian regime become more aggressive. So protecting democracy today requires more than diplomacy. It depends on collective defense, stronger military capability, and a credible determinant within existing alliance.
To Alex, please. Oh, sorry.
Could you once again repeat this?
Yes, of course. What is your considered view on the long-term ways Russia's war against Ukraine is challenging Europe to respond?
Oh, we talked about it. So few challenges we are at the moment, we have a problem of solidarity within Europe. It started with Brexit, and Ukrainian war has amplified these divisions. So I think in one sentence, I think that one of the greatest challenges is to work towards unity and trust.
One sentence. Think of the interwar period. Think on that carefully.
Okay, I mean, I think a much kind of messier Europe, which with less clear institutions, coalitions of the willing, EU membership mattering a lot less, the European Union transforming, being more security oriented rather than being a liberal project, which is about trade and economics, which it basically has been since the 1950s. Even if we think of Ukraine being integrated into the European Union, that will transform the European Union for all kinds of reasons. I think President Zelensky had it right actually when he said Europe is just this messy kaleidoscope, and I think he meant it critically and was right to be critical. But I think even in a positive scenario, it will be a messy kaleidoscope, but hopefully a better functioning one. Okay, sorry, that wasn't one sentence, but.
Well, Russia is at war not just with Ukraine, but with Europe and with democracies everywhere. And we need to wake up and recognize that. We need to have faith in ourselves, in our democratic resilience. There's a Handbook of Democratic Resilience. We need to defend democracy as well as Ukraine. We absolutely, as Alexandra said, we have to unite behind democratic values and defend them. It's a long sentence, but it's extraordinary that people who are not the friends of democracy seem very well equipped to use democracy to undermine democracy. We who are the friends of democracy need to remember that, stand together, stand with Ukraine, and use democracy to defend democracy. Because the future of Europe will be, the future of Ukraine is the future of Europe, and that's why it matters so much. And I'm not sure that European publics are aware of that as much as they should be, but let's hope that this is something that's going to unite and not divide us, because we can get across this and stand up to this, but the key thing is to stay united.
Thank you very much. And I think that highlights the importance of conversations like what we're having this evening, really. I think more conversations, the better. I'm going to put the floor out to all of you to ask any questions that you might have for our panelists. I'm going to start right in front of me.
Hello there, Bash Bhattacharya, one of the fellows at RSA. This week, there was an interesting speech by Mark Carney at Davos. The thing I found quite interesting was discussions on risk management and nations being more reliable on their own structures. To my mind, that's strategic deterrence. And to my mind, given what's happened recently, if I was leader of one of the middle-tier countries, that would be gaining nuclear weapons. For example, if I was in charge of Poland, that'd be the thing I would be going for, really, because that's the best way of having deterrence militarily in the relatively near future. I don't know what anyone else thinks and whether the next few years going to be going down the nuclear proliferation route.
Half my career has been spent in the nuclear non-proliferation field and the strategy field. You're making the nuclear pregnancy argument. You can give that to South Korea, Japan particularly. Japan has looked carefully, given its proximity to both China and North Korea. Brazil, you can run through a big long list. Pretty much all of Europe. At the moment, you have two, Britain and France. Make of it what you wish. But Britain is operationally independent. That is the gold standard benchmark that the MOD set. France is, to a large degree, totally independent. And this offer a second center of decision making. I feel the more might be better argument 1,000 times. More nuclear weapons is more likely to lead to instability. People do silly things in crisis situations. And we learned hard lessons about escalation control, off-ramps, diplomacy, leverage, escalation models during the Cold War. I don't think replaying that is good. I like the Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968 has held horizontal proliferation largely. Where we're lacking is in vertical arms control. We've seen the START Treaty, INF disappear. Arms control and confidence security and building measures is a good road to go down. That's largely been UN-led. The UN has been itself under-challenged and underfunded. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Just add a sentence. What Poland is doing at the moment, I don't want to speak on behalf of Poland, just being Polish, it doesn't mean that I'm expert on Polish politics. I'm not. But observing what is going on and being hugely interested in the current state of affairs, I can tell you that Poland is spending a lot of money. At the moment, we are number one in terms of GDP spending in the whole of NATO. So by 2026, we are going to spend about 4.7% of our GDP on defense, which is a lot of money. And obviously, when you hear that, we have now, also you've mentioned that we are struggling with some heritage of our historic past and the past leading party, that we are divided, which is obviously, it is true, but I also have to be trying to be objective. We also have to remember that actually what Poland did, we are arming ourselves to teeth, and this notorious in some areas party that is law and law and justice. I was trying to translate it from Polish. Yes, Law and Justice Party actually was the leader in the armament of Poland. Like they bought and invested a lot of money in the current defense system that we have. So we are doing what we can. One more thing, that we are talking a lot about buying more weapons. I would like to incentivize you to a piece of information that probably is also important. We should remember that any 1% of extra money that goes to defense is taken away from, for example, healthcare, because the money comes from somewhere, right? We want to defend ourselves, but on the other hand, we don't have enough money for everything. So if you go to hospital, and we have NHS in Britain, just remember that this money must come from somewhere. And Europe at the moment is borrowing a lot of money in order to subsidize those countries which want to build defense and so on. So it's a very complex issue. We are living in very complex times.
Thank you, and thanks for the question. We do have one from one of our participants online. Anne is asking, do our panel members have any observations on the folly, as some might see it, of UK defence spend not having been increased and better directed over the last 10 or 20 years? Who would like to take that? Yeah.
Do you know, ironically, is one of these areas AI might actually help cost defense expenditure, cost overruns, and we're in an earlier iteration of my career. I used to go to the archives in Kew, and I used to come across lovely phrases like long-term costings and cost overruns. You have all these budgets. You have operational requirement at the start, then that gets changed, and we've seen it with Ajax amongst other things. With an operational change then comes, well, that'll take a bit longer. It'll cost more. The in-service date has slipped 6 months, then a year, then 2 years. There's been very few examples of on time, on budget defense deliverables. And this is true across the defense industrial base, right across the West.
Very cheap drones by Lazar Group. And
yeah.
They're developing 100, how much is this at the moment? They're very cheap drones, so actually they are delivering on time, and they prove that if you promise to deliver, and when you're in a situation that you have to develop something quickly, they are doing that. So Lazar Group is Lazar Group, yes? Is that Lazar Group by Pavlov is an example of that. They're developing a highly specialized AI-based drones in the Ukraine, and they're using it for combat, in combat situation.
Yeah, it's been incredibly innovative, absolutely.
And cheap as well, yeah. Relatively cheap.
Do we have any other questions from our audience here?
Thanks all for the talk. It's very interesting. My name is Mason. I work on cybersecurity and digital risk at International Development Bank here in London. And I wanted to ask you all, considering the theme of the evening, about the energy security piece, especially in relation to cybersecurity. A couple days ago, EU passed a new cybersecurity law, or at least an addendum, that is basically, trying to root out China from the supply chain of critical components in the renewable energy industry and others. And in Poland, there was a major cyber attack a couple days ago on the DSO there. And so I guess, and anyone who wants can take this question, what do you think the implications of that sort of fracturing or balkanization of supply chains across energy means for Europe and for European security? And that can be cyber or physical.
I'd like a follow-up.
Sorry. Thanks. Hi, I'm Lee. We're involved in a reanimation of civil defence in the UK. It's not just the two of us. 1925, Britain, under the Committee for Imperial Defence, initiated the world's first civil defence programme, which by the Second War, there were 1.9 million volunteers. So it's interesting, this business of latent war effects on democracy, and we now talk about whole society resilience. It's interesting to me that the three European powers which value civil protection the most by spending, Finland, Sweden, Switzerland, are probably the strongest democracies. And there's something in that. I don't know what there is, because I'm just a retired person trying to help. But can someone talk about that? This business of defending democracy and civil defence, and people be willing to do their bit.
Two questions there. Where is the mic going? Okay, yeah.
I'm not here to plug my book, I promise you, but my 2022 book, Cyber Warfare Threats and Critical Infrastructure, is all about your question. Electricity is the front and center key component piece of critical infrastructure. Why? It runs everything else. You take electricity away, society starts grinding to a halt. So the balkanization of it might actually work in its favor. I mean, my book is based on a long-term project I did with Airbus Group. And, without boring people with words like SCADA and industrial control systems and the like, the complexity of said system would actually work in its favor. It's not obscurity through, it's obscurity by design. The security by design, security through obscurity. That's what I'm getting at. So it might actually help in a sense. But that's, as in Ukraine in 2015-16 with Black Energy and Crush Destroyer, it shows you the cyber-physical effects it can have. And what Russia's done is adjust seasonally. So when it's been unsuccessful with a multi-nation effort, private industry and government, to thwart Russian cyber attacks, it's gone after infrastructure through kinetic missiles and the like. It shows you the motives for that. It shows you the patterns clearly. And then there's a summer switch to grain production. And it's done the same. And it's also attacked transport infrastructure. So you've got supplies inwards and refugees outwards. That kind of tells you well, not so much all you need to know about their war aims, but at least about their conception of just war theory or just war tradition and ethics and morality.
Democracy.
Well, thanks very much for that question about democracy, because and I think it's all linked, really. I mean, in a way, it sort of brings everything nicely to a head, because you look out at the world tonight; it's a very frightening place, not least because of the points the gentleman raised about cybersecurity and the energy infrastructure. And I think it's important that we don't panic, that we have a certain degree of faith and trust in ourselves. And I think it is about resilience. It isn't about relying on leaders or AI or anything. We've got to rely on ourselves. And we need to understand what that means to actually, that this is a time now to, we can't take our democratic values for granted anymore. We have to stand up and be counted, all of us. And I think if we do that, if we know, now that's an easy thing to say, how do you actually do it? But there are models, as you pointed to, and there are precedents for this. And I think that has to be the name of the game. We need much more critical thinking. We need to be able to understand what is a fact and what is opinion and how we can decide that for ourselves. We need to find ways of not polarizing, of protecting the center a bit more and building that up, the things that we actually value and have in common, not just the things that we divided. And we need to see the threat for what it is. We need to understand that it is a chaotic, no longer rules-based world in which powerful forces are at play at every level, in space, in Ukraine, in our sitting rooms, in our energy, trying to hurt us and to harm us. And we've become complacent. And so what frightens me more is not the Putins and Trumps and the Chinese attacks on our cybersecurity, undermine our energy. It's the complacency of our complacency as citizens. And I want to see much more effort, much more focus, much more attention given to that. That's why I'm very grateful for that question. And really for us to get serious about what it means to build democratic resilience from the ground up, because I think that ultimately is the only thing that's going to save us.
Sacrifices that they have endured. Just to really, for Tatiana, just to shout out to Ukraine, the resilience, the tenacity, the never giving up, and embracing the democratic spirit that wasn't there before necessarily during Soviet occupation. And I mean, my heart goes out. And if, people can just grasp the true sacrifice, maybe there'd be a lot more support as well. And just putting an end to this nonsense, really.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, have I missed one? I'll come back.
I am quite afraid of being misunderstood. But responding to the last gentleman who spoke from the panel, I want to say what my last note to this evening is: experts, when asked, give the problem to the people, question mark, i.e., another similar session, but the other way around. We are asking questions and the experts are there to respond and enrich our own understanding. So it's like looking to ourselves, the people. Remember, it was said, people are the salt of the earth, the beginning of life, etc.
So like a reversal of speakers and audience.
And being symmetric meeting, another meeting from here to the experts and the experts back to us.
I hope this does spark more conversation, especially at the RSA. We're well positioned for it with everyone here and the different fields that everyone comes from. That does bring our session to a close. We are slightly over time, so thank you for staying with us. Thank you for being here. But mostly a huge thank you to our panelists. If we could give them a round of applause, please. And thank you, of course, to our participants online. It's been lovely to have you here as well. I suppose there'll be an opportunity if anyone wants to speak to a panelist when we wrap, but enjoy the rest of your evening.